Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. John, we are just waiting on right now. Hopefully, he should be able to join us shortly. Rob, good to see you. Very excited to
You
engage
too,
in
Jen.
this conversation once again. It's been a while, so good to have you.
Been a minute.
Now, while I'm going through all that, make sure y'all are at home hitting the buttons. Hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff so that you get your emails every morning that we go live, which is, of course, every day. If you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, by all means, put them up in the comments section and we will engage them directly throughout the conversation. We will be continuing on playing the game. We're going to be playing that game all week. And yesterday, we were just actually discussing this a second ago. Rob, you and I were just talking about what we were kind of viewing as playing the game. I kind of described what we were talking about yesterday, how we kind of defined it more than anything, I think, before really diving into anything specific. Shaun, what do you think? Do we
Yeah, I think we did a pretty good job. I mean, first of all, you ambushed me
100%?
right from the get go. I didn't have a clue what I was going to say or what we were going to talk about. And it was like, so, Sean, would you just like to start us off with a huge freaking definition of a mega topic? It's like, what? So I think that between my lame attempts to start us off and then the guests filling in all of the gaps that were left in that initial volley, I think that we got off to a pretty good start.
I agree. Yeah. Um, I totally agree. So today, yesterday, we kind of finished off and we were talking about situational awareness and like kind of how to see the game, how to like understand, start looking around and seeing the rules and starting to figure that out. And so I had another little definition that I'm going to hit on really quickly and then we'll kind of dive into the conversation. So the definition that I pulled up today is to do things in the accepted way or in the way that you are told to in order to keep your job or to achieve success. And I thought that was a really good line because I love the fact of the accepted way or that you're told to do. And Rob made a comment on this one right off the bat when we were talking in the green room about, the corporate life being corporate life and the fact that there's a certain way people do things and that's just the way things are done. Rob, you want to expand on that a little bit to begin the convo and then we'll dive in?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, this topic of like playing the game, right? Like, it's one I struggled with as a younger person, right? Like, what is the game? Like, what are you talking about this game, right? And it was really my choice to sort of continue a corporate stream for my career or my employment that it really sort of smacked me in the face. And then from there, you see it everywhere, right? And it kind of very much aligns with what you gave as a description or a definition on that one, Chance. And that is, you know, I've been in corporate for like almost 15 years now, right? And like I've always sort of looked at it like maybe like my personality type just doesn't get it or something, right? Like the corporate atmosphere, like I'm a corporate dude, right? I work for enterprises and whatnot, but my personality's always found something very odd about the corporate sphere, right? And for the most part, I've come to realize that the corporate sphere, while it is made up of, individuals, right? Like individuals have their own lives, their hopes, dreams, all that fun stuff. They got families at home or they do stuff on the weekends. But it's weird how, for the most part, like the interactions and the processes that happen within the corporate environment, like there's just something a little bit off sometimes with it, right? Or like that's the feeling it generates. It's like this, everybody gives the same platitudes or everybody meets in the same places to say their like little one-liners about the show that they watched last night, or they have certain ways of communicating with each other in the boardroom kind of deal, right? And this is all like a framework that might, for maybe I'm just the odd duck out, and maybe like that's a normal, like that's maybe like a personality structure that they carry with them, every other day that they walk the streets kind of deal. But for myself, it always felt like we were all wearing masks in order to sort of adhere to what you said, Chance, like an accepted sort of way of conducting yourself and communicating and going about your workday that feels very unnatural to how maybe people would be if they were just given free reign. Like, you catch them in their house, they're not going to say the same things in the same ways or act in the same ways because they're outside of that environment, right?
Playing with the mute button myself. Do you have any thoughts on that, Shaun?
I do. So I agree with the spirit of what Rob is saying. I find the corporate world to be a bit of a mask where people put on masks, go to work in a masked environment, or more correctly, a sterile and impersonal, and you've got to toe the line in the way that we define our culture. And if you don't fit into that culture, then you're now anomalous. You stand out, and I'm not going to say that you're something to be feared, but you are something that doesn't fit in with the normal flow of the corporation. And that can cause problems. You can be the problem in that sense, unless you find a way to swim in the stream. Now, here's the problem with the corporate stream. For me, it's too freaking narrow. It's a creek. It's a little creek that is so constrained and so slow flowing that I don't have room to play. I need a freaking river. I need an ocean as compared to the corporate structure of a creek, if that makes sense to everyone. So I haven't worked in a corporation since, I've been a entrepreneur since the early 2000s. And I've worked for myself ever since I left the teams. I've worked for no one, and I like it that way because I'm my own boss and I understand the employee in the business. It's Shaun, and so I'm not restrained by any little creek or a little stream. I have a huge ocean that I can swim in, and I had to start swimming in that huge ocean like doggy paddling, trying to figure it out. How I fit into the large world, not the tiny little constrained world of the corporate world. I had to figure out my way in the big world, doggy paddling initially. But now I'm really comfortable laying on my back in the ocean, floating and staring at the stars and thinking about all kinds of things as an entrepreneur, as a sole employee of the business called Shaun. I like it because it allows me to be creative. It allows me to explore. It allows me to not be constrained within reason. And so playing the game, I feel, in the corporate world is an entirely different thing than the game that I play in my world. That's for sure.
Do you think that it has some, like, what I'm thinking is that the military is very similar in that it is a very linear game set. The rule set in it are you do this, you will succeed to a
Yeah,
minor
that's
degree,
correct.
right?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about yesterday, I think. And correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly the point that I wanted to make is the military system is restrictive, but it's a structure that when you first jump into, the structure is big enough for you to explore. But eventually you start bumping into the edges of the exploratory model that we're talking about, the three-dimensional model called the Army. Once you start bumping up against those edges as an explorer, we'll call it Shaun. Well, Shaun wants to explore more. And so that's when Shaun steps out of the box of the three-dimensional construct called the Army and starts exploring beyond the edges of what is in existence at that time or has been shown to Shaun as a young man. And so the military, I think, is a great opportunity to step into a structure, learn structures, figure out how to work them for your advantage and for the advantage of others. But eventually, I feel, and I don't care what part of the military you're in, I feel that you have to step out of the box to look back at the box to figure out new ways to do it better for you and for those around you.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that applies to the corporate world, Rob? Do you think that, like, as an initial step forward into the different styles of games into a construct, that it works in a similar way and allows you to kind of build your way out, or is it more streamlined?
So yes and no. So, again, I've never been in the military, so you guys will have to correct me if I go off the path when I compare here, right? So using Shaun's sort of explanation, right? Like you join the military as the Army as a private, and I guess initial sort of entrance testing and all that sort of stuff will start to set up this linear path of what jobs are available to you, et cetera, right? I find the regular day-to-day sort of corporate sort of track, it's a little bit more limiting just by self-definition, right? Like, so if you think about the time when you explore your options for probably what we're talking about here is higher education, because that's what you kind of need to enter the enterprise sort of world, right? Like there's that bare sort of minimum foot in the door sort of piece of paper. Like you're exploring those things when you're 12 to 17, before you've then, put all your eggs in a basket and hopefully you've got good high school marks and you choose this major or this path you want to take in post-secondary, right? So if we talk about, you enter high school at 13, 14, you're there until you're 18, you're at college, university for another 4 years, right? Like you've spent 10 years preparing for this singular path, right? That, I hate to say it, if you fail at that path, or you don't like the job or career you've chosen and that you sort of follow through with, like you're much more limited in what you can do laterally, right? Like you're sort of, in a lot of cases, and hopefully you have this trouble as a mid 20-year-old and not a 30 to 55-year-old kind of person, but sure, you can change your path, you can go back to school, etc., right? But again, now you're rededicating a whole pile of years towards retraining to a degree without the job that's definitely at the end of that path, right? Like it's all dice roll, right? It's okay, I'm going to go train for the next 4 years to this new job path, this new career, whatever, and then I have to start putting in resumes to hopefully even get a call for an interview, right? So inherently, I think a lot of people, whether it's like this or not, because of those factors, I think a lot of people see it as an extremely linear, you only have one direction path with not a lot of latitude to the left or right, right? Because, I mean, again, everybody, if you're like me, I'm a product manager. Well, I do product manager stuff. Like if I wanted to laterally change to more of an analyst role, or if I wanted to change industries completely, like I'm leaving this life behind and betting on a chance that I'll start a new one, right? With outside of a completely different structure, right? Like, again, I know there's lateral moves within the services, even between different branches, right? But, let's say, again, you're in the Army. You can move around laterally and you're still working for the Canadian government, right? Like you still have an employer, right? You're not starting from scratch truly again. So there's some differences, even though there's some commonalities, I think.
Yeah. Shaun, some thoughts?
Yeah, playing the corporate game is a way to live life for sure. It's not for me, as I've already established. And here's why. I find it to be a trap. Now, that's going to annoy a whole lot of people, maybe even my wife. But I just see it as this. You go to high school. Whether you know what you want to be when you grow up is unimportant, because eventually you're going to make a decision. And that decision might look like picking 4 years at a university or college to solve what you don't have solved. So you pick something and then you invest 4 years of your life in it. And that investment, that resource burn rate, is time and money. So the time is 4 years. The money could be upwards of $80,000 a year, depending on where you're going. And that's just freaking tuition. Never mind all of the other capital cost expenditures and the burn rate on a per month basis. So, you make a choice, you invest resources, and 4 years later, you step out of the institution called learning, and then you are given a choice. Which game do you play? Do you play the corporate game or do you play the non-corporate game? They're both good choices, but if you choose the corporate game, as I feel, it's a safe play versus the less safe play, which is the entrepreneurial path. Now, the safe play is often chosen because over the last 4 years, someone created debt and they need to pay off that debt. And so they're going to step into a corporate world. And now what are they doing? They're working for money. They're not working for themselves. They're working on the behalf of someone else who they don't know, who's called a shareholder, who they may not align with. And therefore, I think, I'm not saying for everyone, but I think for some people, they can enter into that trajectory unknowingly with the sense that it can suck your soul out. If you go to work for something that you don't believe in, just for $1, month after month, year after year, it starts stacking up. And all of a sudden, you'll come to the conclusion that I don't want to be here. I'm only here for the money. And so before you get to that position, stop, go back in time, and think before you go to university or before you make that branching decision of entrepreneurial or corporate, that's the time to start thinking about what's my corporate future going to look like 10 years from now? And how am I going to feel about the only reason I go to work is for the dollar?
Rob, you got any points on that?
Yeah, I just agree with all of it. I also agree with, the thing that Shaun said might annoy some people, that corporate can be a trap. And I would even argue that for most people playing it, it's a little bit of the game of sorry. You know what I mean? Like it is a bit of a trap that playing that game. Most when they idealize, or from my experience at least, the people I run into who idealize a corporate career, they envision a position. Okay, so like that, the easiest classical sort of corporate dream is everybody wants to be CEO one day or something like that, right? Like I want to run the Apple. Problem is, like, I've always been at odds with that thinking, because that to me is almost like identity seeking. Like I, the individual, just see myself as a job title, right? And there's so much more to consider. So like, for example, I just mentioned, like, I'm a product manager. Like that's a corporate label out there for someone's job position, right? All it means is that I direct the creation of a product a company makes. The caveat to that is that my life dream is not being a product manager. Okay. I so happen to be a product manager because it's what my the last decade has brought me to skill wise. But the important notation of that is I'm a product manager for security companies. Okay. That is what makes my day-to-day like enjoyable. It's not just creating any product. My thing is creating and managing products for digital and sometimes physical security. Why? Because I think that's important, right? Like that's actually important. What I do, like what emails I send, I do not consider important whatsoever. Like it just I don't care. Like, do I communicate while I'm at my job? Yes. But I don't think I'm Shakespeare just because I'm good at writing emails. Like it's not a metric that I track. It's not a part of the game that I value on the scoreboard, essentially, right? So I'm not saying that that's how I keep myself out of the trap. I believe that's how I keep myself out of the trap on the corporate path. But I see so many people just like all they care about is, to Shaun's point, I'm making X amount per year, or that allows me to buy, Y car, or I'm at the top of the food chain in my little corporate pyramid. And it's kind of like, cool story. Are you happy? Like that sort of deal.
Mm-hmm. It's bringing to mind, yesterday we talked about the difference between people who play the game and game players, like people who work the system or play those things. And it kind of clicked in my head yesterday about perhaps it's just that their ambitions deviate from our ambitions, and that there's at least for myself, there's almost a visceral feeling when you hear about someone who's playing the game, who's like working the system to get what they want. But isn't that just a deviation of what I see ambition being utilized for? Or do you think it's actually almost a negative trait? Shaun, what do you think?
I think before we could get to teasing out the details on that, there's a little bit more macro discussion beforehand, and that is, if someone is in that trajectory, in the corporate trajectory, maybe they're super happy. Maybe they've, like Rob to some degree, has found a way to give a sense of meaning to it all. where there's an element of satisfaction with the day's effort. Maybe not full satisfaction, because maybe Rob is wired so that if someone gave him $1 billion and said, "Hey Rob, just do whatever you want, do good." Do good. Well, I'm sure that Rob would craft a lifestyle that was good for him and was good for others, and he'd be doing good, and he'd feel real good about it, and it wouldn't be corporate, it wouldn't be entrepreneurial, it'd be just Rob doing Rob, and Rob would be happy. And that's an easy way to explain what everyone should be doing in the world, except those things require money. The $1 billion that I just handed over to Rob. And so the trick or the trap or the tough part to get past is, if someone steps into whatever trajectory, be it entrepreneurial or corporate, now they've got to start making bank in order to pay off some of the resource burn that they initially had. And then if you're not paying attention, the years start slipping by. You're putting money in the bank and you're spending money, and you're putting money in the bank and you're spending money, and decade, 2 decades later, you have a little bit more affluence, but you realize that 2 decades of your life went by. And maybe the 2 decades of your life that were the best for you to like be super rad. And I mean, I'm not saying that you can't be super rad starting today or tomorrow or next week. What I am saying is you can't get those 2 decades back of corporate life. And so that's a really important notion, that it doesn't matter what a person thinks or feels or doesn't do. You can't change time, man. All of your wishes 10 years from now won't change the fact that the last 10 years, if you were unhappy corporately, you can't change that. It's done. The only time you can change something is right now. So if you're unhappy, start thinking about how to change that right now. And it might mean someone who's an entrepreneur shifting into corporate, or it might mean someone in corporate shifting to entrepreneur, or it might take someone just taking a month off to figure out here we go, ... their purpose, their why. Why are you here? You're not here to make money. You're here to fulfill your purpose, whatever that is. And that's for someone to figure out all by themselves in the quiet moment at their kitchen table with a pen and paper. And if they can't do that, then call a friend who will sit down with you and help you work through that process. It's a simple puzzle, but it's for you to solve. And if you haven't ever thought about solving that puzzle, we could talk about all the games in the world. But at this point, you can't spell game unless you can spell why. Your why is my thought. So all of the nuance further down the trajectory is important for sure. But right from the get-go, like the individual, if they haven't considered their purpose or their why, they haven't even passed go on the Monopoly board yet in my books.
Rob, got any thoughts?
Again, Shaun with the just spitting knowledge, man.
Just dropping fire, man.
I mean, I would, I'd maybe make an addition to what Shaun said there. Like, I mean, before you figure out the game that you want to play, you have to figure out who the player character is, right? Like, you got to know who you are in order to objectively know what game you're going to put your quarters into. That dates the crap out of me because I don't think anything takes quarters anymore. But like I know, like, when we have chats on the collective, we're generally, speaking about the good advice parts, but I'll use myself as a quick example just to highlight what Shaun said and why I think it's dead right. Okay. So I just, for multitude of reasons, was really, really bad at figuring out the player character for half of my adult life. Okay. Just my upbringing, and then spending, again, to Shaun's words, a couple decades sort of running from my life and for my life kind of deal. Okay. That took up a lot of time. Okay. And the really real, the real sort of implication of that is, I'm 40 now. Okay. Doing pretty okay in my life and whatnot. Okay. Like I like what I do as a career, as per my previous explanations. I do still think corporate's weird, but if you want my honest answer, if you ask me, if I could go back to being 18 again, for no other reason than to choose a different path, would I? And I'd tell you, yes, absolutely. And are there days that I still think about that path right now? Absolutely. Problem is, the time's been spent. And some of these things that I might choose to do otherwise, time's gone on those. Or it makes it at least extremely hard to go get those things. Okay. So I talk about, like, I mean, I come from a law enforcement family. I still think maybe one day we would turn in my papers and just jump corporate ship. How much time do I have left? Right. And if I'm really thinking about it for the kind of guy I want to be, how much body do I have left for that? Right. Like the fact of the matter is that, to Shaun's point, and this is something I myself took for granted, and I think a lot of humans do until it's far too late, you know, is that time can never be replenished. You can make more money. I could quit my job and go to McDonald's and still make paper, right? Maybe not as much, but the money still enters my hand. There's not a damn thing I can do on this planet to get any amount of time back, right? To make those choices. And again, I don't look back with regret. It's just a fact of how my life turned out, right? And the little nuances, the little events that happened throughout my life. But it is still reality, though, that the time is gone, right? And the sooner you can sort of have that conversation to figure out the settings of the video game that you want to play and the type of character you're going to be in Fallout, the better, because it gives you more room to find what game you truly want to play, I think.
Interesting. Do you think that, so now I grew up being a kind of a jack of all trades. And Shaun likes to call me a dabbler. And for many years, I absolutely was a dabbler. I probably still am.
Confirmed.
I really like to know about a lot of different things. I like to try a lot of different things to find the things that I really enjoy. And coming from that background of like trying stuff and trying something else and trying this and trying that and trying that, I realize now I took a lot of time not understanding the fact that I was in a game to begin with, and that it was all I was doing was working my way down the arcade line, as a great reference you made, right? I was putting a quarter in this game, cool, that was fun. Putting a quarter in this game, oh, cool, that was fun. But I was never spending any time getting good at any of them. There were some that I would.
Oh, you were spending time.
I was spending time, but I wasn't spending any money doing it. Rather than.
And you were spending money.
That's true. You're right. So the question that I wanted to touch on here was trying to figure out the rules of the game, trying to see the construct for what it is. When I walk up to a video game machine, I can play a game and I can have it figured out pretty quickly. But life is not that easy, right? So how do we start seeing the game? How do we start seeing the borders? How do we start developing our concept of the construct that we're in? Shaun, I'm going to come back to you.
Yeah, so if I'm going to use your video store or video machine store example or analogy, I think the first step before you step into the store is just sit at home and figure out why you're going to go to the store. Why do you even want to go? What is the appeal? And I'm not asking you, these are just rhetorical statements. Mm-hmm. Why do you want to go? And when you get there, why are you excited to step up to the first machine? Or have you not thought about what machine excites you? Or are you entering into the store with a laissez-faire attitude of just another day in the park, just another day in the video store? I don't have to think about it. I just walk in, I spend my time and money, I walk out, I'm no wiser for it. I'm actually poorer for it, and I think I'll do it again tomorrow without any thought. That is Groundhog Day. And that Groundhog Day is burning resources every single day. But before you jump in the car to drive to the video store, you can sit at home and think, what game would stoke me? Obviously Galaga. I mean, come on, don't even. Obviously Galaga. And so, you've got to think about what is the attraction to the game that you want to drive over to and play. And so when you get there, you obviously have a passion for what it is, and you can focus on that. I see that John Stryker-Meyer has just hopped into
jumped in, yep.
So I'll stop my comparison between video games and Chance Burles' resource burn rate, and we'll say hi to John.
Let's get John in here for sure.
John in his house.
John in his house, yeah. When he comes back, he was just on the phone, so it's all good. We'll, hey, John, Perfect. How's it going? Can you hear
I
us
might
all
be
right?
slow, but I'm slow. I apologize.
It's all good. No worries. I should have checked. I should have checked in a little bit earlier. We got a whole new SOP set up for today.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a long story. It's my bad. I apologize.
Yeah, but you're
no
coming
worries.
in looking good, buddy. You're coming in looking good.
100%. Yeah. So, John, great to have you. First off, we've been talking about playing the game. We've kind of described what the game is and all that good stuff. But before we get you up to speed on the conversation, you want to give us a little 30-second, 45-second rundown, who you are, where you come from, all that stuff, and then we'll
Yeah,
dive into
sure.
the rest.
Name's John Stryker Meyer. Flunked out of college in 1966. Went in the Army. Read the book, The Green Berets. I said, if I go to Vietnam, I want to go with these guys if I qualify. Went through the training program. And in May of 1968, after in-country training in Vietnam, arrived at FOB 1. And a recon team, Spike Team Idaho, went out on a target and it disappeared. The two Americans, Glenn Lane and Robert Owen, today are still two of the Green Berets, 50 Green Berets that are listed as missing in action in Southeast Asia from the Vietnam War. And these are the men that were in the secret war across the fence in Laos and Cambodia. So that's how I got my job in recon. So I was on Idaho for a year from May to April of 69. And then from October 69 to 70. And then after that, I got out of the Army. The reductions in force were coming. And I just didn't want to be a part of that. Went back to college. And today we're living happily in Tennessee. That's the 45-second version.
I like it. I like it a lot. Shaun, you got a thought right off the bat?
No, dude's a legend.
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but
Been around
thank
the
you.
block a couple of times. It's all good. So yeah, we've been talking about playing the game, and I was just thinking about this while you're talking. Back in the '60s, the game must have been pretty linear in terms of what people expected out of their lives, or perhaps out of joining the military. Was it pretty consistent? Like, you joined the military, you're going to Vietnam. Was that like the standard?
Yeah, and at that time, the regular Army people and like the Marine Corps, I think it was like Army, we had 8 weeks of basic training, then 8 weeks of advanced training. And during the advanced training is when the Special Forces recruiters came by. And so that was when we went through the test. And at the end of it, the sergeant goes, Meyer, you're lucky. We lowered the standards. So from there, I went to Special Forces training. And there, everything was different. In basic training, jump school, and AIT, everything was, drill instructors yelling at you, get off your ass, throw you out of bed, just to harass you. And then Special Forces training was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was basically, you're here to get trained. We're here to work with you to train you up. And there's a war going on. We need bodies. They didn't say it that way, but that's what the bottom line was. And, I arrived there at Fort Bragg in May and didn't get to Vietnam until April, because after we were done with our regular training, I went TDY, temporary duty, for 12 weeks. We had to learn radio teletype. Top secret transmission was radio teletype at the time. Never used that, never used the Morse code or anything from all of our training. And then once we got to FOB 1, Spider Parks was our team leader for Idaho. And we hired 4 or 5 new indigenous troops to the team because the team had been wiped out. So they lost Glenn Lane and Robert Owen. And then 4 or 5 indig. I forget what the exact number was. And then we hired young guys. We hired 3 15-year-olds and then a 16-year-old that came on the team. And we all trained up. We started running missions, had practice missions, night ambushes, things like that. And then we finally went in country, across the fence.
Diving right into the game right off the bat. I love it.
Oh, yeah. We were lucky. I mean, our first couple of missions, we were inserting Air Force sensors. And we did one in the Ashaw Valley. And again, the NVA fight when they want to fight. So we put them in with minimal contact, and we put some in outside of Quezon. outside of FOB3, historic caisson where the Marines had been, but they closed that compound at the end of June, early July of 68. But there's Highway 9 went by it. It was still a major quarters. We put the Air Force sensors in there.
Yeah.
And then and all those missions, like Spider Parks is like, hey, we've been on 4 missions with you and you haven't earned a combat infantry badge yet. Well, that ended in October, of course,
Yeah.
where we were in contact for 4 hours, went through 600 rounds, and we literally stacked up the bodies of the NVA.
That's crazy. Shaun, you had a thought a second ago?
I got a thought because I was just listening to John and making a comparison between his time and today's modern time. And so I'll start it off at a macro level and state that I think playing the game or being in the game was different then than it is now. Life was simpler to some degree. And I'm contextualizing that against kids nowadays, like 17, 18-year-old kids who their world is so complex and complicated and it's so big on the internet. Like what they're learning or seeing or talking about today is quite a bit different than the 60s for sure. And so I think that said, I find the interesting comparison. Here's the context that I like. Is John went through a system called basic training where, much like all of us in basic training, you were just curious how many times your bunk bed was going to get flipped over that day. And so you didn't learn a lot of things. You were taught in a specific way, and it might not have been your way that you like, but it is a way. However, when you go into special operations, you get to find the way that works best for you in a learning environment. The environment is broad enough that it allows the individual to learn in a way that makes sense to them. Now, I'm not saying it's like a free-for-all, obviously. What it is a environment that has some latitude where no one's holding your hand. You have to figure out how to use your own hands. And so through that learning process, there's a wild difference between basic training and special operations training for John. Now, the fascinating part to me is that then they hired some 15 and 16-year-olds, and they got taught the special operations way, not the basic training way, the special operations way. And so how is it that 15 and 16-year-old kids in a foreign country can be turned into quote-unquote special operations capable? But we've got 15 and 16-year-olds here in North America who can't tie their own shoelaces. And so I think there's a wild difference between the times, of course, but I think the wildest difference is the focus, the conviction, the understanding of the why of the times. And so it feels to me like playing the game as a 15 and 16-year-old nowadays, unless you've got a lot of focus and discipline, there is no need to like bear down at 15 and 16 and figure out how to become a special operator, as it were.
John, you got any thoughts on that?
It's clearly different. I mean, like today, you can go online and learn about the pre-qualification for special forces, what that is, then the actual qualifications, and there's a lot of, I'm told, now I haven't seen this myself, but I've talked to young guys that have read my book and go, hey, I read your book. I thought I want to become a Green Beret. So I went online and I read about the pre-qualification. And I think that one of the follow-up points that what we were just talking about here is there's one similarity. I mean, I've talked to young Green Beret. In fact, we just had a 5th Special Forces Group reunion this past weekend. We had dinner with several of the younger guys, and all of them to the man said, we read your book, we were inspired to join Special Forces, and today I take pride in doing the missions. That's what I'm here for. So there's that bottom line, like, does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah, but before you joined, we were talking about the comparison between the corporate world and an entrepreneurial path. And so the corporate world or the institutional world is different in the, we'll call it professional office-based institutions versus the institution of the military. And so I think the institution of the military understands that you're there to serve, whereas the institutions that are, we'll call it any other industry, they're not there to serve, they're there to make a buck. And so the comparison at an institutional level is interesting to me, but without a doubt, in the institution called the military, if you're there to serve, you're in the game for the right reasons. Like all of those young Green Berets, they stepped into that path full well knowing that they were going there for a higher calling to serve their country. And so it keeps the message really clear to anyone who steps into those boots. Whereas it's a bit muddier when you compare it against the institutional or corporate world.
Do you think that there would be a, because you're talking about, just a second ago, you were talking about having 15-year-olds jump into the world of special forces, right? And you have people who are 18, 19, 20 jumping into the world of special forces. Do you think do you think entrepreneurship in that same manner in terms of it has more freedom from the constraints, the confines of the construct, do you think it is more effective to get people younger, to engage them in that game at a younger age to make them more fluid in the game, perhaps? Or do you think it's better to allow them to mature some and then engage them in that? What do you think? John, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Well, I'll be glad. It was funny because at this reunion, there was several of the senior NCOs at the table, and I raised just that point. And I said, I'm biased. I was in the early day, we call it the kid SF or baby SF. And so I went straight from the street, basic AIT, jump school training, Vietnam. And some of the people that I've had friends of mine that have been in the Robin Sage, that's the training course, the final phase for special forces, which is the most unique training in the world, where the A teams all come together to learn how to work as an A team, working with indigenous personnel. And some of the guys, there was mixed answers. I mean, I'm biased. I feel like, and some of my friends that I've taught in Robin Sage, they said when the young guys come in off the streets, they don't have any bad habits other than being civilians. Whereas some of the guys that come from the Rangers or the 101st Airborne, when they come in, they've got some bad habits from the days of being in traditional Army. And so that's the juxtaposition. I'm biased. I think that if you get a young guy off the street, he goes through all that training. When he's done, he comes out there the day he puts on that green beret. It's nothing but business from that day forward. And it's an honor. It's kind of like there's that saying, when you earn the green beret, that beret says more about you than anything you could say about yourself.
Mm, I like that.
I like that. Rob, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, because I completely agree with John there. I'm going to come from obviously the corporate side, right? And I think that the common thread, or what I see as the common thread, is the structure. So whether we're talking about military, whether we're talking about corporate, whether you're talking about a kid who's 15 or 16 or someone in their 30s, right? I also kind of think, like Chance, you'd said like you'd kind of related like entrepreneurship to something not remotely, but a little bit more remotely close to the concept of SF, yeah. Right? As opposed to Big Green Army, right? Or in this case, entrepreneurship versus signing on the dotted line contract for some giant enterprise, and you're the cog in the machine. The earlier you can start, like, so, teaching a 12 or 14-year-old how to run their own business, right, is inherently a lot better, in my opinion, right? Like less training scars are gonna that person's gonna come with than if someone was trying to run a business when they're 35 and they hadn't done it before, right? The thing that I find, because John, you had mentioned, today, like you can go on the internet. You're absolutely right, man. Like I use JTF2's like fitness guide as my day-to-day, like, hey, I'm just a regular civilian trying to keep fit, right? Like all of that information's out there, right? The internet and all of its glory. So with the fact that now it's 2023, not 1960, and there's all of this information out there. Why isn't a bigger proportion of our society a powerhouse in terms of industry or the military or whatever, right? Like, because the thing that hasn't changed is that common thread. Like, if I was 12 or 14 and I had a parental unit that thought it was important that I learn the skill set with a structure to run my own business, would that benefit me at 40? Absolutely. Did I have that? No. So, like, again, the structure just wasn't there. So you don't sort of apply the knowledge no matter how much it's there. But I have to agree with John. I mean, at the end of the day, 18 X-ray was probably a little bit easier to deal with because, again, they're coming fresh off the street and sure, crappy, weird civilian sort of quirks or whatnot, right? But they didn't learn from like their squad mates in the 101st or whatever beforehand and then have to train them out, right? And that's a problem in the corporate sphere too. Or again, you're making some transition from corporate to entrepreneurship. Like, as we get older, we ingrain more habits. And yeah, we can still learn new tricks, right? The old dog, new tricks kind of thing. The old habits work against you sometimes, right? So the earlier you can kind of develop that skill set within a structure, I think is beneficial.
Sean, some thoughts?
No, I just agree. It's just wise words. And
Sean,
that's of course
John,
my
thank you.
theory more than the other guys. I'm sorry, which one?
All good. No worries. Sean, do you have any thoughts?
I'd just like to echo what was just said. And
Bad hearing. I'm sorry, Sean.
you're good. I think that it's an interesting conversation that we're into now, and it's a shame that we're like only got about 14 minutes left, because I feel like this would be a real rich environment to play with, in the sense of making comparisons between entrepreneurial to institution, age-based comparisons in the game to break bad habits sooner rather than later. There's lots of things to tease out of the devil's in the details, as it were. So maybe we can bypass that for another time, because I want to take full advantage of John while John is here. And so, John, have you got any thoughts on the idea, the framework of playing the game? What are your thoughts on how to play the game well?
Well, the key thing for the game is training. I mean, that is, you just can't say it enough. I mean, we spent so much time on the range going through the drills, then going through everything from night ambushes to the missions, mission prep. Sometimes we would just go from back to back running missions without any interaction. Or no time in base. Other times, we had the luxury of training up to do a wiretap, to go in to blow up a fuel line, to capture POWs. We went through practicing different techniques. And again, in terms of playing the game, the critical items of self-defense, execution of the mission, just to do it enough so it's all automatic, so that when you make contact with the enemy, or if you're in the middle of a mission, which is blowing up a fuel line or doing a wiretap, you're not learning on the job or struggling. Everything you're doing about accomplishing the mission, you've worked on it ahead of time, and you try to imagine as many situations where Murphy's Law could impact you on the mission. Because no matter where you are, no matter what the mission, Murphy's Law will surface somewhere, and it will impact you, and you have to be ready for what you're not ready for.
Interesting. Got any more thoughts on that, Sean?
Yeah, and so, John, while you were sitting at that table with some junior and senior members at the Green Beret get-together, if you had one thing to say to that entire table, because it's a diverse table, so you could deliver a message to the young'uns, or you could deliver the message to the old'uns. But either way, it's a diverse table. But you've only got one message to send to the entire table. What would you tell them in respect to how to play the game better?
Learn from the men that have been there. Practice and train your ass off for whatever the mission. And I just cannot stress that enough.
Rob? What about yourself? If you're talking corporate wise, what about
Well,
you?
I mean, tell you the truth, I'd say the same thing. I'd just use different language. At the end of the day, like the biggest pieces of advice I give to anybody, I mean, really just humans, but especially in the corporate world, right? Like it's not a finish line. Getting a job is not a finish line. Like if you want to really actually succeed, especially the game that's kind of weird in itself, corporate, you have to constantly be learning. You have to constantly be applying, and that means reps, right? So like, sure, your work day is done at 5. Cool. What are you doing to advance like your skill set as the person you are? Like, much like qualifications in the military, like nobody just hands you a promotion and a bigger salary just because you exist, right? There's plenty of other people that are looking to be better than you. The guys looking to be team leads, guys looking to move on to bigger and better units in tier 1, whatever it may be, right? Like someone's always playing a game over and above like what you're putting out. So it's all about, again, you're constantly learning, you're constantly doing reps, and you're constantly applying yourself. And that just doesn't stop until you're retired or maybe dead. I don't know. Haven't figured it out.
Shaun, what about you? You were just at the 30th reunion, right? 30th anniversary of JTF2. If you had to stand in front of all those dudes, give that same statement, what would you give?
It would be a very short sentence. It would be, "Excuse me, I've got to go to the bathroom," and I would duck. Because I think this is actually an important subject, and I know that you're kind of asking the question a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's a valid question, and so I've never considered ever doing anything like that before. But upon reflection, I think that if someone made me do that, first of all, you've got to consider it an immense privilege, whether you want to do it or not, because what you're about to do is try to pass on some wisdom. You've got to use that opportunity to make the people in front of you better. I'd be totally the wrong guy too, because everyone in that audience is wiser than I am in my mind in that moment. So these are good opportunities to figure out what you've learned in life that truly is of value when you've got to deliver it to a crew in front of you that are way more awesome in my mind than I am. And so I think these kind of questions, though they're sort of academic, I think they're good questions. And I don't have an answer for you, Chance, because I've never, in my mind, put myself in that position where I have to deliver that level of wisdom to the level of the audience that was in front of me. And that's life, man. Levels to the game. I mean, if you step in and you're delivering a little bit of a speech to the kindergarten class, that's an entirely different level than stepping up in front of the entire JTF2 organization at the 30th anniversary. My brain would blow up if someone said I had to do that. So I'm glad no one did, and I'm glad no one ever will. But if someone asked me to, that again is a great opportunity for me to sit down with a pen and paper and figure out what my freaking why is in that moment, and then execute against the moment.
That's a great way to dodge the entire question.
Total dodge. I took a play right out of John Stryker's playbook there. I'm dodging all day long.
Dodge. Left and right. I like it. Well, let's get into that a little bit more then. I get asked this pretty regularly. I actually have a couple requests now to speak in front of a bunch of kids at Remembrance Day ceremonies. And to play the game well, I want to be able to pass on as much information as I possibly can. And I'm sure, Shaun, you would probably be asked if anybody knew what you did and you weren't some random lone ninja that doesn't want to talk about his history. I'm sure you'd get more emails. I'm sure you get lots, actually, now that I think about it. But how do we take the construct of that game? How do we take those moments, whether they're ambushes or not, and utilize them for the best of those around us? How do we take how do we not dodge the bullet? How do we not dodge the question? How do we engage that directly? John, I'm going to come back to you first. What do you think?
Well, I've spoken to some high schools, and when I go in there, first of all, they didn't know nothing about Vietnam. And so the idea, I always try to, at some point, talk very briefly about the war, good versus bad. And then our country is the best in the world. and that I always close with John F. Kennedy's line, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, because you live in the best fucking country in the world. You better shape up.
We're gonna watch that language though. Just
Oh,
so you
sorry
know,
about
it's all good. But everyone gets one, and then they get booted.
You get
You
three.
get two. You get three. Yeah, I'm good with that. But no, I appreciate. Absolutely. Shaun, what about yourself?
I do have an answer for this because someone just recently asked me what. No, they mentioned that they'd been invited to go and speak to a high school class, and so they asked me how I would run that little program, and I said, well, first of all, you got to keep it simple, and so by that, I'm suggesting that you've got to understand your audience. There's levels to the game. And so the level at grade 8 is different than a level speaking to the entire unit called JTF2. So know your demographic that you're delivering to. And then adjust your velocity for that level. So you can't come in and try to talk about how to crack the DNA code to grade 8s. So you've got to not dumb it down, but you've got to deliver it to the right level. And then once you're delivering at the right level, you've got to interact. It is not a one-way delivery. It's a two-way moment. It's a two-way highway. So what I suggested to this individual was, as soon as you can, start creating interactivity along the lines of, hands up, who has ever ... and then take it somewhere. So interact as much as possible with the audience in order for them to feel like they've got some sense of ownership in the moment. There's nothing that will put a grade class to sleep faster than some old dude like me bumbling out nonsense that they aren't interested in. I can make a guess at their level and what they want to hear, but it's my job to really figure that out rather than guess. So I'm going to figure it out through interactivity. I'm going to engage them with questions.
I like that. Rob, what do you think? If you had to talk to a group of school kids about the corporate life, perhaps.
Yeah, they're like, hey, corporate guy, come talk to our kids. No, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't have much more to say that John and Shaun haven't. That's fun to say, by the way. Haven't already said. Okay. I think my wording for it would be, because Chance, you touched on, you would want to provide all of this information, right? And I think that's key here. And it doesn't have to be talking in front of a school. It can be any sort of event that's sort of like that. I'm just meaning outside of the regular. It didn't just get stopped on the street by my friend and having a chat kind of deal. Is that the I think importance needs to be placed on meaningfulness, right, over informational. So while the information can still come out in those sort of chats, the experience needs to be meaningful, right? And it's a unique sort of environment, right? Like, as opposed to the day-to-day, here you've got this speaker coming into our school today, or, hey, this reunion I'm going to get to talk to or talk in front of. It's already being put on a pedestal to be one of those memories that crowd, whoever's hearing you, might carry with them the rest of their life. So the nuance of the information is that is important versus what they took from it, just like Shaun said, right? And like, if you can simplify that message so it's not overly informational and more leans into the meaningful, I think that's the greatest impact, right? Because I look at those sort of events and I still remember some of those as a kid, right? Those weird, like those random school assemblies that you have, and you had a particularly good speaker. Some of those individuals in that crowd, whether they're entering SF or they're entering CANSOF, or that's where they're going, or it's you're watching some inspirational sort of corporate leader or whatever. There are people in that crowd that might use that as a basis of their life going forward, right? So I mean, I think the impact is what takes prevalence, and it's got to be simple. It's got to be simple and crafted from that perspective that I want this to be meaningful and not necessarily informational.
I like it. I like it a lot. Now we are just about at time, so I think we'll dive into some final thoughts here quickly, and then we can chat in the green room, but carry on the conversation tomorrow for sure. Any final thoughts on anything we've gone over so far? Rob, I'm going to come to you first. Anything on playing the game? Anything we've touched on at all?
No, I think we covered a lot. My final statements would be like, hey, guess what? There's a game everywhere in life. Everything we're involved with, you'll find that there's some sort of gamification to it. And in order to play that game well, you got to know why you're playing the game. I'll use Shaun's why. Like you do. You need to know why you're playing the game before you even know the structure of the game, because the structure won't make sense unless you know how you fit into it. Period.
100%. John, some final thoughts?
I would take Rob's thought and just go, like in our case, if you're going to a situation you don't know, to learn from anybody who may know. But what you said is great about learning up. And then once, like in our case, welcome to the Secret War. And of course, they didn't bother to tell us we had the highest casualty rate of the Vietnam War. So learn from the people who have survived to that point. And in your case, for being an entrepreneur, take lessons learned to move forward.
Shaun, some final thoughts?
Why do the guests always have to make it so good, but yet so hard to follow up on? So I would just say this, that to John's point, maybe, stepping in and learning from others on how to save your own life in the Vietnam War is really important. But then the next level to that thought process is learn from those who've already learned the mistakes so that you can learn them to pass on to others. I mean, we're just the middleman. I mean, we're out here in our solo journey trying to save our lives to some degree, but our ultimate responsibility is to save those around us. And so learn the lessons, not just for you, but for the people all around you.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of knowledge here for sure, and don't worry, John. We'll get you rescheduled, and we can have you back on for the full show. And we'll
Dude, I did not get enough John. I did not get enough John.
No, we got to get.
Oh, I apologize
for
dropping
it's all
the ball.
good.
That's okay, but still, we need more John.
Yeah, we need you back here. We're going to get you rescheduled, absolutely, and looking forward to it. Rob, always good talking with you, brother. It's always I have a blast with you, Shaun. Great combo. Thank you all for watching. Really appreciate it. So as we all learn what the game is, that allows us to build our ability to play that game, and then you can grow into it and be the person you're meant to be. You can do that with us every day here on The Collective. We'll see you all tomorrow.
Airborne.
Chimo. Nice.